what I'm going to cover today, we could actually do a whole nother 4 classes on. We're not going to do that, though. We're going to go forward. So just to get ourselves oriented, we're talking about the Exodus today, the actual Exodus. And to get ourselves reoriented to what's going on, a mixed multitude, the 10 plagues have happened, and a mixed multitude is leaving Egypt. A lot of people miss this. Oh, you got to read the Bible carefully. This is why I'm always pushing context. You got to understand the context of what's going on. If you miss the context, you're not going to interpret the Bible correctly. A mixed multitude leaves with him. The fascinating thing is that God gives the Israelites instructions on how to do the Passover. And then the Passover actually happens. Well, when the mixed multitude leaves with them, God gives the instructions on the Passover again. And some people think, well, it's repetition because it's important. He changes something about the Passover. It's for the alien among them as well. And you're going to find throughout the whole law that you're going to see the aliens among them are going to be mentioned over and over again. So it says, and when you're in the land and you do this, make sure that the alien among you does it as well. So it's not just Israelites that are leaving, which is pretty significant. There's 600,000 men on foot, not including children. Now, is that men generic for men and women? Is it men generic for fighting age men on foot? I don't know. And I'm okay with that. Okay, but it is a mixed multitude. It's not just Israelites that are leaving. Where is everybody going to go the same route? Possibly. Are these aliens that are sojourning with them, are they going to stay with them? Are they integrating into the various tribes? Possibly. We don't have a full answer. All we know is that a significant amount of them are going to stay with Israel, and they're going to identify with the various tribes. They're going to join the tribes and be with them. And be there, and the same people. And God will be their God. But check that out. Whenever you're reading Exodus through Deuteronomy, look how often it says the alien among you. Okay? And no, this isn't ancient aliens. So it's non-Israelites with them. Okay? Moses is taking them to Mount Sinai. God told him in Exodus chapter 3, said, it'll be assigned to you, you will come back here with them and worship me at this mountain. So they are going to Mount Sinai. That is their their interim destination. Their final destination is going to be the Promised Land. But as far as leaving from Egypt, they're going to Sinai. They're not going to go directly to the Promised Land, but they will. And they are well provided for in terms of valuables and in terms of herds and flocks. Food, they're lacking. Food, it says in Exodus 12, they didn't have time to let the bread leaven. They had a month's supply of bread. Okay? So the interesting thing is after a month, what are they going to eat? Manna. That's right. So the manna is going to start flowing in a month. Bruce.
So when they started eating manna, they were complaining about how better things were back in Egypt. Did they not have the herd of cattle and sheep with them when they're in the wilderness?
Yeah.
They didn't want to slaughter them at all?
Yeah, they can have that as well, but
saving them for when they arrive in the Promised Land?
For both, because they're going to be there for 40 years in the desert. Okay. But you have to be careful how you manage your flock. Okay. All right, so they have supplies. They're well supplied. They've got 600,000 men on foot. Who knows how many people are with them and what the breakdown is, how many are Israelites versus how many are aliens. I couldn't tell you. Okay. All right, in understanding the Exodus and understanding how are we going to find out what the route is, how did they leave Egypt, you've got to understand ancient geography. Okay, this is Egypt today. This is the Nile, and then this is the Nile Delta. Okay, the Nile runs from the south to the north. It runs downhill. Okay, you got the Mediterranean Sea here. You've got the Red Sea here, or the Suez Sea, and then the Sinai Peninsula. But anyway, you've got to understand, what did it look like back then? Why is that important? Because it doesn't look the way that it does today. It didn't look the way it does today. It looks different. And it's hard to reconstruct that. The water geography of Egypt has changed because the course of the Nile itself shifts. Hey, Wes. And the Mediterranean Sea itself, the coastal shift. There's a coastal shift. Apparently, it was a little further inland, and now it's gone a little further out. Also, the Suez Canal has had a massive impact on the seas and the lakes in the region. Okay? So as we try to think, and I've heard several experts in geography and as far as Egyptologists, some of them are really big on this, others are missing that, which is fascinating to see. I had seen one person interacting with a certain archaeologist who said, shouldn't we consider the ancient geography and how it's changed? And this guy responded, why on earth would we need to do that? And I thought, really? It's 3,500 years later. So it is important to note. And to this end, we really do need the help of geologists to analyze. They can analyze the different strata to help reconstruct it. Some people have done work on it, but there's so much work that needs to be done to get a better understanding. That's why, Joy, it's so difficult to find the location of these places. There's a lot of cities that are named, and there are a lot of opinions at where these cities are. And depending on the archaeologist that you're talking to or the Egyptologist that you're talking to, they're 100% sure on some of these cities. And when one is 100% sure that the city is here, and the other one's 100% sure that the same city is actually here, there's a problem. That's why I hold some of this with my hand open instead of having such a 100% opinion. I have a 100% opinion that these events happened, but I personally am more flexible as to where it may have occurred. And this plays a big part, okay? So the changes in the water plays a big part. So this is what we have today. Lower Egypt is in the north. Upper Egypt is in the south. Let that sink in. They call it that way. We would not name it this way, but they name it this way because the Nile is flowing downhill, and this is upper, and then this is lower. We've got a great bitter lake, which is right here, the Suez Gulf here, the Gulf of Aqaba here, and the Red Sea and the Mediterranean Sea here. That's what it looks like today. Now, I don't have a good map. I tried so hard. For all the people that wrote different things about it, I couldn't find a map that was recreating what the ancient geography was like, other than to say that if you notice here, at the Bitter Lake area, they said it was a lot bigger over there. And they call it the Sea of Reeds. Okay? So it was much bigger there. The Suez Canal has apparently also had a big impact on this. Although I will say this Great Bitter Lake, I've got a picture of it later, it's huge. So if it was even bigger before, then it's fascinating. Now, why am I pointing to this? the Sea of Reeds here and the Red Sea. A lot of reeds grow in this area. And the Hebrew word for the Red Sea is the Sea of Reeds. So one of the potential crossings is actually here instead of the Red Sea. Actually, there's even a crossing up here, but we'll get to that. Before we get into the seas and the location of where they crossed, it is important. Fascinatingly, this is vitally important to your understanding of where the Exodus happened. The deserts of the Exodus. We get three deserts. The desert of Shur, the desert of Sin, and the desert of Sinai. The desert of Shur, thankfully, we have markers as to where it's located at throughout the Bible. The book of Genesis, chapter 16. You remember when Abraham married Hagar, the Egyptian servant Hagar? His wife Sarah wasn't getting pregnant. And so the idea was, God promised we'd have a child. We got to help God out. Why don't you marry my servant Hagar? And he marries Hagar, the Egyptian. Well, she gets pregnant right away. Sarah's mad at her, and Sarah actually sends her away eventually. Hagar leaves twice, but one of the ways she's going is back home, and she's going through the desert of Shur. So that she's leaving Canaan and going to the desert of Shur. Also, it says in Genesis 25:18 that the desert of Shur is east of Egypt as one heads the way to Assyria. And Assyria would be up the north, okay? And also, David and Saul attacked the Amalekites in the desert of Shur. So the desert of Shur is this desert that serves as the big border between Israel and Egypt. The desert of Shur. The desert of Sin, it says in Exodus 16:1 and Numbers 33:10 through 11, the desert of Sin is alongside the Red Sea. Okay, and then the desert of Sinai encompasses the end of the Sinai Peninsula, Mount Sinai, and all of that. Basically, here's what we've got. The desert of Shur is here. So when Hagar leaves, they're somewhere in this area here. When Hagar leaves to go back to Egypt, she goes through the desert of Shur. Does that make sense? If Egyptians are going to go to Assyria, Assyria is actually beyond our ceiling. But if you're going to go to Assyria from Egypt, you're going to go through the desert of Shur. I know I sound like I'm beating a dead horse. I just want to be sure. Yeah, modern highways go through. Yeah. The desert of Sin goes along the Red Sea. The desert of Sinai is here at the bottom, and Mount Sinai is there. Why is all of this important? It's very important because there are ideas out there of what the Exodus route was, which way it went, and where these deserts are. The other ideas, some of them, do not agree with God's Word. I might upset a few of you today, because I believe that we can 100% dismiss certain Exodus routes. I might be aiming at your heart here. You may have your heart set on this particular route, but it cannot be. This is the route. The route where they leave Egypt and they go down to the Sinai Peninsula, and the Red Sea crossing is down here into Arabia. And the wilderness, or the desert of Shur, is over here in Arabia. And the desert of Sin and the desert of Sinai, and Mount Sinai is over here in Arabia. Okay? We're going to find out a little later the Israelites' trip from Egypt to the Red Sea is a 3-day trip. And there's 600,000 men on foot. And so the case here needs to be made that they left Goshen and they, in 3 days, made it all the way down here and crossed the Red Sea, hundreds of miles through the desert.
They're going quickly.
Yeah, he did. Wait, it was Pharaoh's chariots. So they crashed the Red Sea. They stole the chariots, and wait a minute. There's no way to make it work. So it requires, since the desert of Shur is way down here, it would require that when Hagar fled to go to Egypt, right here, she went, down to the desert of Shur to get to Egypt. Okay? Or when David and Saul are fighting the Amalekites who are in their land, which would be up in this region. Here's the desert of Shur. When they're fighting the Amalekites in the desert of Shur, they actually go down to the land of Ishmael, which was not given to them, and fight the Amalekites there. It doesn't make sense. I am sorry. I know that the Muslims call some of the mountains over here the mountain of Moses. I understand that. It don't make it so. Okay? The Bible is very clear about the location of these things. Here's the desert of Shur, the desert of Sin, and the desert of Sinai.
So you're saying that, what is her name?
Hagar, yeah.
Hagar went down that way?
No, I'm saying she didn't. It makes no sense. It would, if this is the desert of Shur, it requires her. She's like, I'm going back to Egypt. I've had it with y'all. So instead of going directly to Egypt, she goes way down here.
So, can you point to where you were saying that it is on this map?
Yeah, on this map. Here's the desert of Shur. Here's the desert of Sin. And here's the desert of Sinai. Okay? So this is wrong. Unless somebody wants to throw out the biblical evidence. And if they do, then just throw it all out and forget the Exodus altogether. Or just,
is that a popular map?
it is. It's become popular. There's a good documentary, well done documentary. It's wrong, but a well done documentary about this. And I remember when I was younger and I watched it. I think it was back when we lived in Norchester, Jason. My brother's here. And Mom and Dad borrowed something, and I watched it one night, and I was like, wow, that's fascinating. So the real Mount Sinai is over here in Arabia. No, it's not. When I was a child, I thought as a child, but when I became a man, I don't want to be too cruel. Some people believe this, no problem, but it's incorrect. Jason.
But in that documentary, just to go along with what you said earlier, it fits really well because you get that big rock there that's looks like it's been split down the middle. There was water that was flowing there at some point. It appears that all the pieces fit. It looks like there was a big campground area for 600,000 men on foot. So everything fits, except for the geography is way off.
Yeah. And then fortunately, though, or unfortunately, there's a lot of desert regions along this entire region, okay? You can find split rocks and say, look, split rock. You can find open spaces. You can find valleys in between mountains where shrubbery grows, right? Shrubbery. A shrubbery. But it has to fit the location that the Bible explains, and the Bible gives perfectly good markers for all of this. All right, the Red Sea in the Old Testament. Red Sea is not as cut and dry as you may like. The Hebrew word, so if we're looking at the Hebrew text, which would be the Masoretic text, or the Samaritan Hebrew that Eusebius talked about, that I referred to in the first lesson on this, and I've referred to since, uses the Hebrew word yam suf. Yam is sea, suf is reeds. A sea of reeds. This becomes like a generic designation for a sea. And so they refer to this as the Red Sea, and they also refer to the Gulf of Aqaba as the Red Sea later on when they're building a navy over here in this Yam Suf, Sea of Reeds. And then I believe that they called, I'm not 100% sure, okay, sure. But I believe that there was a sea that was up here that they also called the Sea of Reeds. Yeah, Ryan?
When you're saying they, who's they?
The Israelites.
Okay.
Israelites. So in the Old Testament, you will see the generic term Red Sea or Sea of Reeds used in the Hebrew. If you look at the Greek Septuagint, it uses the word red and sea. Okay, so this is the Greek word for red, erythros, and the Greek word for sea, thalassa. Okay, and it will say Red Sea. And that becomes a little more specific to what we would think of as the Red Sea, which would be down here or even right here along the Sinai Peninsula. The difficulty is that we can't be 100% sure with this one, because we're going to have other markers that are going to make it look like definitely this is the Red Sea. No, definitely the Bitter Lake is the Red Sea. No, definitely the lake up here is the Red Sea. It's not easy. That's why I think we need to be careful and we need to be patient. And the geography is different there today than it was back then. So what makes a lot more sense at the time to them is not going to make as much sense to us today. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, the Exodus route. So they departed from Avaris. They departed from Ramses. Okay? Ramses, as you recall, was built under Pharaoh Ramses. Prior to that, it was called Avaris. Avaris was abandoned, and Ramses was built very near it and on its place as well, 150 years later. Okay, so the ancient historians Josephus and Manetho both, and Justin Martyr also mentions it, both say that it was the city of Avaris in the land of Goshen, and this is where they left from. Okay, remember what I said before about anachronisms. The Bible uses anachronisms. A scribe will write down a location with an updated name as they're looking at the previous Old Testament because they want it to be understandable to their reader. Just like we don't know what Cyprus was called back when the American Indians were here only, right? Do we? Does somebody know? If I started using that name to refer to Cyprus, would it make sense to you? Coincidentally, they called it the Yam Suf. It was the Indian word for Cyprus. But to make it understandable to the newer generations, places are updated. Okay, And I pointed those out to you before. A quick note, Elvia, to answer your question. Elvia had asked me, how do we know that we can trust Josephus? I will say this. There are modern scholars, and when I was in college at U of H, history professors were really hard on some ancient historians, making fun of them, saying we should throw out Herodotus. He's a fool. And they used awesome arguments. Herodotus is an idiot. Are you going to go read what he wrote now? Having me giving you this amazing argument.
Is it idiom or idiot?
Idiot!
Oh.
He's stupid. It's like when I taught high school and I asked my students, how many of you like Obama? All these hands up. I said, why? He's awesome. Okay, but specifically, he's the best. Can somebody give me something specific? Yeah, Mr. Little. Yeah, what? He's great. Okay. How many of you like George W. Bush? Ooh, all these hands go up. I said, you're going to show them, right? You're going to give me some specifics? He's awesome. No, George Bush is... They couldn't give me any specifics. Just like those people, when I was in college listening to my history professors, they said Josephus was an idiot. He was a traitor to his people. Scholarship has relied for over 1,000 years, relied on Josephus, who preserved ancient texts that are now lost to us. He preserved them, wrote them down word for word. So did Eusebius. So did Manetho. So did Berosus the Chaldean, Nicolaus of Damascus, and all these host of other people that are mentioned, writing down word for word things that happened in the ancient times that are lost to us. There is no good refutation of Josephus out there, or of Manetho, or of Herodotus. You can have some wiggle room in all of them to say, well, there's some discrepancies, and you can work on that, which is fine. You know, Josephus isn't going to be 100% right all the time. Neither is Manetho. But it's what we've got. It's the record we have. And for somebody to say you can't trust Josephus, one of the only arguments I heard is because he betrayed his own people. Okay, he betrayed his own people. He was adopted by the Roman Emperor Vespasian. Okay? He had a dream come true moment to go to Rome and to have his adopted father say, son, what do you want to do? The wealth of Rome is at your disposal. The libraries of the Roman Empire are at your disposal. Write what you want. Do what you want to do. It's a dream come true for Josephus, who got to go and look at ancient documents and write them all down. So for somebody to say, well, you can't trust Josephus, ask them why. Based on what? This man's writing word for word what's written down, and scholarship for over 1,000 years has relied on him. Scholar after scholar has looked at him and said, this fits. Not only that, it fits with archaeology as well. So you've got to understand, if we're going to throw out Josephus and Herodotus, let's throw out every historian. In fact, let's only deal with historians that we know that are alive today, writing about things today, like 9/11. You know, and we won't trust anything prior to that. How about that? Or prior to the internet, you can't trust it.
History starts the day you were born.
Yeah, history starts the day you were born, for you. That's right. Okay, so they departed from Avaris, they departed from Ramses, they departed from Avaris, and they avoided the way of the Philistines. There's a road that goes from Egypt into the land of the Philistines, which is up here, okay, and it's called the way of Horus, and it would be the route that they would take to go to Philistia, okay. They weren't supposed to go that way. They were avoiding that way. God said, avoid that way unless they see war with the Philistines and turn back and return to Egypt. Well, it's fine anyway that they don't go that way, because they need to go to Mount Sinai. And this wouldn't be the way. So what they do is they're heading south. They're heading away from this. Avaris is here. All they would need to do is to go east, and they're going to hit the way of Horus, and they'll be able to go. So they go south. All right? Here's the Sea of Reeds. Here's also the Red Sea. Okay? So they're going south in that direction. They go to the city of Succoth, and then they go to the city of Etham. Okay? I do not know precisely where they are. I've got all these different archaeologists that I'd like, and they all have it in very different places. Okay, so sorry, Joy, I'm not putting the cities on the map. But the direction we at least have. We know that they went in this direction. They go to the edge of the desert. And as this was a greater waterway, or greater lake back in those days, the greenery would also be greater around it. It'd be in a wider location. So which desert were they on? It says a generic word for desert. So we don't even get which desert they were in. But they weren't in the desert of Shur, which is here, or the desert of Sin, which is down here. Okay? So they go to the edge of the desert. And then David Roll also contends that they went down this way and then they doubled all the way back up past the Way of Horus. So he said that they went way down here and then they turned around and came all the way back up. That's his contention. He may or may not be right. But they did turn back. The Bible says that. It's at least giving us some direction that they went down and then they turned back. And this is bait. This is bait for Pharaoh. Because Pharaoh's going to say, they're wandering in the land. Why did we let them go? Let's go get them. And so the cities that are mentioned here they turned back to Pi Hahiroth, which is between Migdal and the sea, and it's opposite or beside a city called Belzephon. And there are some people who really think they've nailed down where these cities are in this area here. Okay? And also in this area up here. They've got it nailed down. But the whole point was they were wandering in the desert in order to bait Pharaoh. God is baiting Pharaoh. Because Pharaoh says, see, they don't know what they're doing. They had a 3-day head start. The Israelites had a 3-day head start, which is why it just becomes ridiculous to say that, no, they crossed the entire Sinai Peninsula to go to Arabia. That's another reason this is just, it's not supportable to have that kind of idea. All right, and Pharaoh's forces. So Pharaoh's been baited. He knows that they are wandering aimlessly, is his thought. The Bible says in Exodus that he chooses 600 chariots of his choicest chariots and his other chariots. They're fast, okay? If they've got a 3-day head start, you can quickly go and get them with your chariots. And he also has, the Bible also says, horses and riders. So the picture that the Bible paints is one of a fast-moving army that is sole purpose is to quickly catch up with and subdue the Israelites and bring them back. Josephus, on the other hand, in Antiquities of the Jews, Book 2, Chapter 15, Verse 3, or Section 3, if you want to look at it that way, he says there were 600 chariots, 50,000 horsemen, and 200,000 footmen. So that's Josephus. Notice that the two are not in agreement. We're going to see throughout all the Bible, whenever it's talking about who dies in the Red Sea, it's always the horses and the riders and the chariots. There's no mention of footmen. Now, where's Josephus getting this information from?
He does say army.
Well, it says army, but then it gives... another thing to be careful of in the Bible will give qualifiers. It will say something in general and then provide specifics. Army, his horses and his chariots.
Does it mean infantry?
It doesn't have to mean infantry. If it's going to say army, horses and chariots, it's just like when it says that the livestock that died are the livestock, every livestock that had the plague died. And so it gives something, all the livestock died that had the plague. Okay, not the ones that didn't have the plague. So there's a slight distinction there to be noted. So the Bible never says that it's footmen. When it says the generic army, it always qualifies it by saying chariots, horses, and riders. Okay. Now he might be right. Josephus might be right. I'm not saying he's wrong, Elvia. I'm not now turning back and saying, Josephus, you can't trust him. He was a turncoat. But for the purpose of the swiftness of the army and the picture that is also painted is by Josephus is that they're moving quickly and they're asking where are the Israelites as they're going from place to place, looking for them, and they would need to move quickly, and the chariots and horsemen are going to be slowed by the footmen. Okay, doesn't mean that they weren't there. I wanted to note this. Yeah.
Can you remind me what year Josephus is writing?
Yes.
The Exodus?
Yeah, so Josephus is writing in the 1st century AD. But he's looking at Roman documents, Roman library information that spans back thousands of years.
And the Exodus was in what year?
1446, circa.
1406.
Or 1406. It could be 1406, BC. Or AD. Maybe it was just before Columbus discovered America. He never called it America. He thought he was in India. Everyone look at the Indian now. Okay, crossing of the Yam Suf, crossing of the Sea of Reeds, crossing of the Red Sea. Josephus gives us a cool marker. He says in Antiquities Book 2, Chapter 15, Section 3, the Israelites were stuck between the sea and mountain ridges that terminated at the sea. Mountains that terminate. The Bible doesn't give us that information, so there's mountains that terminate at the sea. And that the Egyptians covered all the escape passages. So they had hemmed in the Israelites. They could, this impassable mountain range, a desert, and the sea, and then Pharaoh's army. So they have no way of escape. Okay?
There's a lesson there. You can hem in people, but you can't hem in God.
Amen. That's a great lesson. You can hem in people, but not God. Very good. So the mountains are an important marker. And so what we see is, at least for these two, we have some mountains here near the Sea of Reeds, and we have some mountains here at the Red Sea. Really, as far as if Hollywood made a movie about this and actually did it right, then I like the Red Sea location the best as far as mountains, because they're the most impressive mountains over there. This one is not as impressive, and the mountains are kind of offset back here away from the sea, but where the sea would have been. Okay? And then there's actually some mountain ridges up in here too, which makes it difficult. Okay, so if it's the Sea of Reeds, so here's the Bitter Lake today, and here's a ridge of mountains, mountainous area here. Okay, so if they were stuck in this area here, it's between the sea and the desert and the ridge of mountains, Pharaoh's army, then this could be where the crossing was. This is what the Great Bitter Lake looks like today. It's not small. It's impressive. Apparently, prior to the Suez Canal, or a long time ago, it was much bigger. So it'd be a great place for a crossing. And if God has used wind to move apart the sea, and then they go through on dry land, and then Pharaoh's army comes afterwards, it'll happen here. Okay? And the geographical markers are there. So it could be there. You know, the fascinating thing is that a lot of what was sea is now just sand. So, can you imagine, if you're looking for evidence of this, which I'm not going to particularly get into, other than to say that there was a popular Facebook message that was going around saying that they found the chariots of the Dead Sea, or the Red Sea crossing, Pharaoh's chariots, and they found skeletons. Yes. Dan, did you happen to look it up to see?
I didn't. It may be false, but it sounded good.
Okay, there we go. That's a problem. It may be false, but it sounded good.
Picture of the diver going down that impressive looking chariot axle.
Yeah. I've seen those pictures. They're good. Yeah, it was made up. And it was made up to make Christians look stupid.
That was something from World War I or something.
I don't know exactly where it was from. Yeah, that's it. There were ancient iPhones it was a box of them. So that's the Great Bitter Lake. And then think in terms of what would be left of wooden axles that have been crushed by the sea and that have been in the sea, or bones that may have stayed in the sea, although the Egyptians' bodies washed ashore, and they would be all bloated. The Egyptians would take care of those bodies and not leave them there, for one.
Well, they did have some technology. They did have metal and iron.
Yeah, they did have metal. They absolutely did.
Mostly wood, but critical pieces like axles probably were iron.
Could be. could be. Now, David Roll contends that the chariots that they used in that time were all wooden, and it wasn't until several hundred years later where they started putting gold on them, apparently. So, organic material does not do very well in waterways. It's either going to be eaten, or if it's wood, it has special circumstances to keep that preserved nicely. It's not easy, especially 3,500 years later. Okay, so don't let your faith rest on, well, if they don't find them, then I'm just not going to believe anymore. Well, good. You know how difficult, even in Egypt itself, how difficult it is to find a papyrus document in the more moist areas of Egypt, the green areas of Egypt that are still intact from 1,000 years ago. It's difficult. Now, stuff that's in the desert can be preserved a lot more easily because it's a dry climate, but where there's moisture, stuff's going to break down. All right, so if it's the Red Sea, if it's the actual Red Sea, so here we go. This is on the opposite side. This is a picture from over here looking in this direction. This is all mountains here. So if they were anywhere in this area, it would make a lot of sense if it was anywhere in this area. I like this picture. This is a picture I got off of... stop. There we go. Picture that I got off of Google Maps somebody had taken from over here, looking this way. So you can actually see the mountains on the other side.
Any idea how deep it is today?
No. Do you?
No, I'm not asking.
I think several hundred feet. One of the difficulties of this crossing, there's a place that sticks out here that would be really cool because it's all mountains here, and then there's this sandy part that sticks out here. But I know it goes a few hundred feet deep, and they said it would be very treacherous if this was the crossing. Of course, we're also talking about 3,500 years later, so I don't know what the topography of the ocean looked like 3,500 years later. I don't know if they stated, was it along the shore that they crossed? I don't know. I mean, at the shore, but in the water, along the shore where it's shallower, I don't know. I can't tell you. I do know that if this is a location, you do run into those sorts of problems where the drop-off is too much and the chariots wouldn't dare go down there because they'd just fall to their doom.
But God can do anything.
God can do anything, absolutely.
Supposedly, in the thing that I looked at, there's supposedly a shallow place somewhere in the sea where they might have grown.
Yeah.
Maybe 20 feet deep.
Yeah, well, even if it's 100, even if it's 300 feet deep, if it's a gradual slope, it's not a big deal.
Right. God can make the water stand up, no problem.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, David Roll contends that it was up here. He said they left Avaris and they turned around and came all the way back up here to really make it look like they were stupid and didn't have a clue where they were going. Here's a picture of Lake Bardawil. Bardawil, I think that's how you pronounce it. So he said that they came up here. He said Pa-Hahiroth and all, Baal-Zephon are all up here. He has locations where they're at up here. There's some archaeological evidence that might suggest that it's up here. There's some archaeological evidence that might suggest it's down here. That's why I'm not going to tell you, this is it. No, this is it. No, this is it. I can't. I can't. I cannot. I want to be intellectually honest with you. Okay? And say that there's merit for all three locations. And the cool thing about this picture is, look, you got some pretty sweet looking mountains back there.
Do you have an opinion, or do you not? Does it matter to you at all? Your personal.
Yeah.
Most likely.
The thing that I like the best, because it fits more with what Josephus is saying, was down here, because there's these two ridges of mountains that make a V that come together and look like that could be the spot down here. But I'm also pretty compelled to believe this area. I don't really buy this one because it's right next to the road that leads to Philistia, right next to the Way of Horus. So I have a hard time buying this one, but at the same time, I don't want to discard it. I know that would be really screwy looking if the Israelites went down here, turned around, and came all the way back up here. If Pharaoh heard of it, it's like, what's with these people? But then again, 3 days later, if they're up here, and if he's got his palace in Avaris, then he's going to easily overtake them.
So back at the time of the Exodus, the bitter lakes were actually freshwater lakes?
It's bigger.
Were they freshwater?
Freshwater and swampy. So swamp and freshwater to this day. You know, there's actually a lot of swamp in Egypt. You know, this whole region right here is swampland. So, and then they get swampy marshes down here. There's evidence of that, swampy marshes. And here as well. So, all right, so that's the possibilities. Let's talk about the actual journey to Mount Sinai in terms of timing. So from Avaris to the desert of Shur, we get that in Exodus chapters 12 through 15. It's 3 days before Pharaoh begins his pursuit, and less than a week before they make it past the Red Sea and into the desert of Shur. They're going to end up in the desert of Shur after the Red Sea crossing. Okay? We know where the desert of Shur is. All 3 of those locations fit into the desert of Shur being right across from any of those locations. Okay? From the desert of Shur to the desert of Sin, we get in Exodus 16. It was 30 days after leaving that manna began in the desert of Sin. So after a month, they're in the desert of Sin alongside the Red Sea and on the Sinai Peninsula, which we'll see here in a moment. From the desert of Sin to the desert of Sinai, it takes 3 months. Okay? They've got a lot of stops on the ways as they're going to various oases, and God's providing quail for them and all sorts of things like that. That's
Traveled at night.
yes. Because the thing I did neglect to tell you is that the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night had already begun, so that they could travel by either day or night. The Bible specifically says that, so yeah. They could have traveled by night or day. At Mount Sinai, we get that in Numbers 10:11. They are there for more than 2 years. So they're going to be at Mount Sinai for more than 2 years. That's where they're getting the law. That's where they're building the tabernacle and all of the implements for the tabernacle. And then they refuse to go to the promised land in Numbers chapters 13 through 14. And because they refused to go to the promised land because they were afraid, they wandered the desert for 40 years total, including this 2 years here. Okay, so that's basically it. But here's the map. Here's what it looks like. This is the everything map. You can go Google this map. You won't find it. I made it. So you've got Avaris here. And so they left here and they circled back. They either circled back and came through here, or they came through here, or they circled way back like David Rohl said, and they crossed the Red Sea either here, here, or here. All 3 of these, the desert of Shur is on the other side. Okay? So it has to be one of these 3. Whichever one it is, though, the desert of Shur is there. Then they enter the desert of Sin, which is, as Numbers says, they camped in the desert of Sin alongside the Red Sea. Now, it is also significant that it calls it the Yam Suf at that time, because it might also point to maybe this is the most likely Red Sea crossing, that it actually is the Red Sea and not just the Sea of Reeds. Okay? From there, they go into the more mountainous desert of Sinai, where they go to Mount Sinai, which we know where it's at to this day. They've known where it's at for thousands of years. They've never not known where it's at.
Is that the same mountain where Moses saw the burning bush?
Yes. Because Moses was with the Midianites. Midian straddles modern-day Gulf of Aqaba. The Midianites straddled this. You had Midianite cities on this side and Midianite cities over here, and Ishmaelites were over here. You know, the fascinating thing is Midian is a child of Abraham. Abraham and his last wife, Keturah. Ishmael is also a child of Abraham through Hagar. So you have these cousins. The Midianites and the Ishmaelites were next to each other. In fact, Joseph was sold to Ishmaelite, Midianite traders that were merchants. So then they go up here to the promised land, where they fight the Amalekites in this region. They go up to the promised land. They go into the promised land to spy it out. Remember, 10 of them came back and they were scared, but 2 of them were not. And then God said to Moses, you tell the Israelites, they're not going to have success because they're afraid to go up. And I'm going to wait till they all die off. And then you can go to the promised land when that generation dies off.
But Joshua got to go.
That's right. Except for Joshua and Caleb. That's right. So they got to survive.
Because they said it was okay. Yeah.
But then you remember, the Israelites repented and said, okay, we'll go and fight them. And Moses talked to God and said, no, don't go fight them because God is not with you. And so they went and fought them and they got beat and they came back and said, okay. Then they came back down and they came to Mount Hor, which is here on the border of Edom. The Edomites are right here, this red border here. And they were there for a long time, circling around the mountain, getting more laws. And then they were going to go through Edom, but the Edomites would not let them go through. The Edomites did let them go around, of course, and the Edomites did provide them with provisions. But the Edomites would not let them cut through their land. And then they tried to go through the land of Moab, and Moab said, no, you can't. It's like Forrest Gump walking into that bus. Seats taken. Couldn't find any place to sit. So they go around the land of Moab, in between the land of Moab and Ammon, to the land where the Amorites were at. And they conquered the Amorites there, and that's how they got into the promised land from Egypt. Now, Joy, for all of those cities that are named, some of them are known, okay? But not all of them are known. But this route here is essentially the route that they took. And these locations, this is where the Edomites were. This is where the Midianites were. Moabites, Ammonites, Amorites, Philistines, Egyptians, the way of Horus. It's all right here. The Sea of Reeds, the Red Sea of Aris.
Who did Moses marry?
Moses married 2 women. The Bible mentions 2 women that he married. It's very clear about Zipporah. We hear about her first, but she's the one he married second. We find out in Numbers that he also married a Cushite woman. We only find out about the particulars of the Cushite woman from the writings of Josephus. When Moses was general and prince in Egypt, he was sent to put down a rebellion from Cush. And Cush is, if you keep following the Nile down further, you get to the land of Cush.
So he married her first?
Yeah, he married her first.
Okay, and then the second woman was, where was she?
Zipporah was a Midianite on this side of Midian. Yeah, Elvia.
I know the Bible doesn't state why the Edomites didn't allow them to cross their land, but do you think it's because of the history of the conflict between how they were born?
Yeah, Jacob and Esau. Yeah, yeah. I think so. I think they didn't trust Israel. They didn't look at them as brothers, and they said, "Forget you, go around." And so then they had to go down by the Yam Suf, on the way to the Yam Suf, to go around their land. But Edom was more than happy to send their merchants out to sell them stuff. Well, you can buy water, sure.
So what are the different colored lines? I mean, I see
Sorry, the black dash dotted line is the route that they took. The red dotted lines here are borders for people groups. The Midianites, the Edomites, the Moabites, Ammonites, Amorites, Philistines.
So after Moses fled to Midian, I guess his Cushite wife was no longer in the picture.
Yeah, she was still in Egypt. Josephus records that when he came back, he picked her up.
Did she go with him on the Exodus?
Yep. And then this is one of the things that Aaron and Miriam are mad about, that he has this Cushite wife.
Oh, yeah.
So
Any thoughts from Josephus as to why Zipporah went back to live with her father after they met up in the desert during the Exodus? Any idea why he sent her back?
No, but I would love it if you read it and let me know. That's how you get people to read Josephus. When you read it, let me know.
Is it read or read? Is it read or read?
Oh, God, that was good. Is it read or read? That's good.
So it's also possible that when you're carrying a group of 600,000 people, essentially decimating everything that you're coming through, whether that be crops, fields, whatever. So it's quite possible that Edom is like, look, that many people is going to really pillage the land. So please go around.
Their heart was off.
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, God is very clear that their heart was against them. He comes down very hard on them for not providing for their brothers.
Well, Moses said we're going to just stick to the highway.
Didn't matter.
Well, I mean, as far as what, in the context of what he just said.
Edomites aren't going to trust them on the highway. So well, I'll pay you for anything, any water or any sheep or anything, I'll pay you. Forget it. Go around.
And who was the group that didn't go in? They wanted to stay on the other side?
Oh, yeah. That was Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben. Yep. They stayed. Well, the cool thing is that when they got up here, the Moabites and the Ammonites and the Midianites were scared, and the Edomites were scared to death of the Amorites. When Israel first left Canaan, the Amorites were, the Jordan River is here, right here. The Amorites were only on the west side of the Jordan River. In the time that Israel went to Egypt, in between that time and the time they came back, the Amorites had come and kicked some serious tail over here. Oh, it's a very involved story, actually. And they had taken over here. And so the Moabites and Ammonites were scared to death when the Israelites didn't go through Moab, but went in here and fought against Og, King Og, and Sihon, and defeated them. And this was good land on the east side. Yeah, on the east side of the Jordan here. They claimed that land for themselves, and Moses okayed it. Certain of them.
And the Moabites are descendants of Lot?
Yep, Moabites and Ammonites are descendants of Abraham's nephew Lot. It's all one big family, one jacked up family. Seriously.
Lord, you said, I'm going to give you 1 foot of their territory. The Ammonites and the...
Yeah, you don't. Yeah, exactly. They didn't get any of the Moabites or Ammonites here. Now the Midianites and the Moabites joined forces together after this. The Amorites were defeated on the east side of the Jordan. They joined together. That's the story of Balaam. Remember Balaam and his talking donkey? Yeah. Yeah, well, they joined forces together, and Balaam actually wound up finding a way to really corrupt Israel. He had the Moabite and Midianite women marry the Israelites, saying, look, God's not going to curse them, but I know that if you send your daughters to marry these men, that it will corrupt them. So Moab and Midian were scared to death that the Israelites were going to do to them what they had done to the Amorites.
Wasn't Ruth from Moab?
Yes.
Okay, so only Joshua and Caleb.
Yeah.
The only two.
Mm-hmm.
And they made it to
the Promised Land. Yeah.
So I guess who did they bury to have more children?
Who did they marry? Tanya, Francine, Donna. I don't know.
So that was the new generation.
Yeah, all the old ones died except for them two, and then the new that they had babies, those are the ones that went.
It's interesting how much easier it would have been just to obey the Lord, and all the fear that they would not have had to have gone through.
Yeah. Yeah, all the dying in the desert and.
I wonder how long it would have taken.
Well, you know, it serves multiple purposes if you think about it. The story of Israel is growing during that time. And it's growing, and people are melting with fear. And especially when they show up and beat the toughest Amorites out there, Og and Sihon. This is why Jericho is melting with fear.
Yes. Searching them out. Get them out of here.
Yeah, exactly. They're scared to death. So the 40-year marinade of fear that Canaan is under it's come to fruition, and it's going to be a tasty defeat.
How long would it have taken them to go where they would? 3 days. 3 days.
To go where?
From Yeah.
Oh, Egypt
To the promised land.
to the it would have only taken a few days because this is the highway, the way of Horus.
Their original destination was Mount Sinai.
Yeah, but they had to go to Mount Sinai first. That's right.
Yeah, so it was 2 years to Mount Sinai and then a few months to get back to Israel.
Yeah, several months.
Everything went as...
I think it was about 10 months to get from Sinai back up here. 10 or 11 months.
2 years to travel to
No,
They spent.
at Sinai for 2 years.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It would. I don't think it would have been good for them anyway to just go and grab the promised land. They've been in bondage for like
Yeah.
a long time, so they have that bondage mentality. They don't know anything about Yahweh, so it was important for them to go through all of that.
Yep.
And learn and understand. Otherwise, they'd never been able to do what he did.
Because they could reflect back on, and the one kids are growing up in that, seeing that God's provided for them every step of the way. So look, what's the whole point in all this? The whole point is to make a defense for your faith, an intellectual defense for your faith. Okay? God said for us to love Him with all of our hearts and our minds. We cannot neglect the mind, and God has provided a lot of details. And it is extraordinarily hard work. And it's work that needs to be carefully done and in context. Everything must be taken in context. The Bible, Josephus, Manetho, Eusebius, Justin Martyr, Berosus of Chaldea, Nicolaus of Damascus, all of these people must be taken in context. So it is very difficult to come to a conclusion. But there's enough evidence out there, archaeological and otherwise. The timing has to be in agreement with what the Bible says. This is why the archaeologists are tripped up, because they're convinced that it happened under Ramses. The name of the Pharaoh was never given as Ramses. It was always given as Thutmose, Tutmos, Ahmose, which are none of those names are the names of Ramses. Okay? So people get tripped up on that, and Jericho was destroyed in the 1300s BC. Ramses II was in the 1200s BC. 1226 is when the Exodus would have been if it was under Ramses. The timeline doesn't fit, not even a little bit. Okay? So, and here's the thing that they will say. They will say, there's no archaeological evidence. Yes, Jericho was destroyed. A lot of cities were destroyed in Canaan in the 1300s, but Israel didn't get there until the 1200s. Until the 1100s, actually.
So who was the particular Pharaoh?
It could be Thutmose III.
Okay, Edmosis?
Thutmose III. Thutmose III.
Okay.
Tutmos III. There's like tons of different names for the guy. Yeah. All right, let's call it.